Welcome to the Fret Dojo podcast, the place where pro guitar players share their secrets. Visit www.FretDojo.com to access online courses and free resources to take your guitar playing to the next level.
Hello and welcome to the Fret Dojo podcast. My name is Vin Amorando. I'm an instructor at Fret Dojo, and today we brought in a guest instructor that we often have for our members, Mr. Niko Malinowski, and we're going to be discussing all things chord melody. But first, let me tell you a little something about Niko. Niko Malinowski is a guitarist and a composer from Boston, Massachusetts. He has performed regularly in Boston and New York City and has toured Eastern Canada. In addition to being a band leader, he also plays guitar as a sideman for a variety of artists, such as Kayla Silverman and Connie May. He currently studies performance at Berklee College of Music as a full tuition scholar and is a part of the Berklee Global Jazz Institute. And as I mentioned, he's also a guest instructor at Fret Dojo. And he has most recently given a 3-part workshop, demystifying and using the modes of the major scale, which our members absolutely loved. So, with all that said, welcome, Niko.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Vin. Excited to dive into this because it's something I'm pretty passionate about.
I know you notice you're in Boston. We're coming into December. It's got to be getting cool up there.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. The weather's weird this time of year because you wake up and it's like almost freezing, and then midday it could be upwards of 50. So layers are key, and then it drops back down to freezing.
Well, you know, it's funny talking to you from Florida here. We drop down to 50, and we have like all the people are panicking. What a difference. Anyway, okay, so let's get into chord melody. So how will you know? All right, I'm going to assume that everybody watching this knows what a chord melody is, but basically, right, it's you are playing everything. You are the melody, you are the harmony, you are the rhythm. It's all you. I think it was Mozart who called the guitar that wonderful little orchestra. I think he was talking about classical guitar, but it applies because that's what chord melody is. So let me ask you this. How do you know if a tune would make a good chord melody? And as opposed to one that you're like, this might be a difficult one to put together. Not impossible, but a little difficult.
Right. So, I mean, based on what you said, right, we are the rhythm, the harmony, the melody, the arrangement, even anything you can conceive of in a group setting, we are responsible for as the solo instrument. So I think with that in mind, certain styles of composition lend themselves better to chord melodies. That being said, like you said, I don't think anything's impossible, especially with how many virtuosic players we have these days. But I'd say in general, the sort of American songbook type tunes, which have maybe more static melodies or maybe melodies with longer rhythmic values, may be easier to also cover the harmony and the rhythm at the same time as the melody than, say, it would be to take a bebop tune where there's lots of language in the melody and kind of a lot going on rhythmically to take care of. So I'd say in general, tunes with simpler melodies make for good chord melodies, but then again, different compositional styles will lend themselves to different arrangements.
Yeah, okay, well that makes sense. But on that, let's say there's a tune you absolutely love and you want to make a chord melody out of it, and it doesn't quite fit in the mold of what you said. Now, what are some of the arrangement techniques or other techniques you can maybe make it a little bit more chord melody friendly?
Right. So I think in general, what lots of people will transpose tunes if kind of the melody isn't an awkward key for the guitar. You know, I had a teacher that used to say jazz is a tyranny of horn players, and so it can be, you know, kind of frustrating where we have all these tunes in like B flat or E flat, and they don't quite fit with either the ergonomics or the tuning of the guitar. So what a lot of guitarists will do is transpose the key into a key maybe that's more friendly to open strings, which will allow you for more arranging possibilities. You can add drones either in the bass or in the top voice. And I'd also encourage people to think about maybe not the keys of the open strings, but the keys where the open strings are tensions, or maybe keys where the open strings are utilized a lot in the melody, so it's easy to change the voicings underneath. So things that you can do to make it more chord melody friendly, I'd say transposition, and also you kind of have to strategize where your chords are going to be placed. And I like to think about this as a piano player, right? I always think it's funny, depending on the genre you come from, and you hear people talk about, oh, like, do you play lead or rhythm guitar? And, you know, as jazz musicians, we're kind of like, I play the guitar.
Right.
So I think it's important to think about maybe where your chords will be placed. And they talk about this too in arranging for horns, right? Things sound kind of awkward and get kind of monotonous if you intend to harmonize every note in a melody. So it's important, and it'll make your job a lot easier as the solo instrument in this context, to pick where you're going to play your voicings, because it makes the ergonomics and the transitions on the fretboard a lot easier if you're not harmonizing every single note. And
so, you know, on that, do you have any sort of, say, like, starting point, or say, not a hard and fast rule, but a standard, like say anything a quarter note or longer, you're going to harmonize, or an eighth note, or anything like that?
Right. Generally, rhythmic values are a good indicator on what can be harmonized. You know, like I said with the bebop example earlier, it's really hard to harmonize a long line of eighth notes or something like that. So it's much easier to pick your battles in terms of longer notes. Those are easy to harmonize. Also, it's important to harmonize the melody where there's new harmonic information given in the tune. Say there's something that's not diatonic to the key, you're really going to want to emphasize that with the voicing. But in general, longer rhythms are a good choice, and also where the harmony changes.
Perfect. But maybe, would you agree with me, somebody who's brand new or to chord melody, or maybe hasn't been playing for too long, is still kind of struggling a little bit keeping up with the chord changes, even if they hit like one chord per bar to get started?
Yeah. One chord per bar is awesome.
Start with that.
In general too, it can get kind of not even pleasing to listen to if you're harmonizing everything. So that's a good guideline, is one chord per bar or something in that ballpark. And
then let your ears guide you if you can do any more, if it needs it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to talk about the exact process you go through. I pass you a lead sheet. It's a standard. I say, okay, Niko, can you put together a chord melody on this? What's your process? Where do you start?
Yeah.
And then what do you do after that?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what the end goal is. If the end goal is like an arrangement I'm really proud of and would like to record, then the process is a little more in depth. But there's also a separate process I can talk about later, that it's like fight or flight, you're handed a chart, play a chord melody.
Right.
But which happens. But especially if you're with people that don't understand how the guitar works and they think it's a piano. But in general, I'd say start with the melody. You know, that's super important. You know, listen to the melody, be able to sing the melody, be able to maybe play the melody or fragments of the melody in a couple different places on the neck. Because what you'll find eventually is that when you start to harmonize that melody with chords, your options will be, you'll be better off, and you'll have more options if you can play that melody in different places and in different octaves. That will also add to the arc of your arrangement. You know, if you can maybe start low or end high, or vice versa, or add some kind of contrast, that's really great. So I'd say first step, definitely learn the melody, like the back of your hands.
A couple of parts, a couple of areas on the fretboard. Okay.
Yeah. So then I'd say the second step for me is to learn the changes. Um, having a good harmonic understanding of, how the voice leading works can be really helpful. Because I can talk about this later, but I think density of voicing is really important to keep in mind too. And it's a lot easier to wrestle with the bear if you can harmonize maybe a melody with one or two notes instead of a full like 6 note voicing.
Sure.
So in general, understand where the important points of the harmony are. Understand how it voice leads. Then I'd say maybe I really like to put, and this is something I've been recently exploring. I used to jump to just trying to put both things together, the harmony with the melody. But I really like to explore just the bass in the melody. So essentially taking the bass motion and just playing whole notes, or maybe even just where the chord changes, and trying to play the melody with the bass notes in the bottom. That is super helpful, and you'd be surprised at how amazing that can sound.
I bet.
Just if one instrument is doing that, you can get a lot of great results just from playing two voices. So again, coming back to that density idea, you don't have to play everything to make it sound honestly really interesting. So yeah, upon you learn the melody, you learn the harmony, you understand where the important notes are and the changes, then mess a little bit with the bass motion and the melody at the same time. That will give you good results. And then the next step for me would be to kind of pick your battles, right? Like we had talked about earlier, rhythmically, maybe one chord every bar. Start with that just to get an idea of how and where the voicings relate to the melody on the instrument itself. And then, keep in mind like the bare bones relationships, and you can elaborate on it later, but think about maybe even like some people call them shell voicings, like using the root, the third, and the seventh of each chord, maybe with the melody, and seeing where that leads you. Again, one chord per bar or more if you hear it. Always be practicing good voice leading, or not if that's not what you want. There are some cool results that can be achieved from jumping around, but in general, if you can guide the ear and play voicings that are close together, that's easy for us, and it's also easy for the listener. And that's kind of the basics for how I develop a chord melody. And then you can get into some more advanced ideas, which is getting really into composition, right? You can think about any reharmonizations you want to do. Maybe there's so many ways you can get to a chord, so think about maybe if you have a 32 bar tune that's AABA, it gets kind of monotonous to play the A 3 times the same way. So maybe think about, I'm gonna reharm the last one, or I'm gonna modulate to a new key, or I'm gonna put a pedal point in the bottom and play the 5 in the bass and play the melody on top of that for 8 bars. You can think about, like I said, counterpoint, thinking about density. You can get a lot achieved just by playing two voices. So I experiment with, moving voices around and seeing what you can achieve with 2 lines rather than full block chords. Because we're not piano players, and we don't have the luxury of being able to voice out everything.
Sure.
It's just not ergonomically possible in the instrument. Then you can get into even arrangement stuff like adding interludes or transitions, or
endless
sort of
options almost, it seems like.
Yeah.
I mean, it really depends if you want a simple.
It goes super deep.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating area to study. Never really ends, right? You just continually get better at it. I should mention to the people listening and watching this, Niko's going to be coming back for another multi-part workshop to the Fret Dojo Academy in January, I believe we have. And so he's going to explore these topics more in depth. So any Academy members listening to this, or if you'd like to join us in the Academy, there'll be links below in the description. Let me ask you, after you've composed it, I want to talk about some of the benefits. Like what benefits? Aside from just because they're fun to play and they're beautiful and you can entertain a whole crowd just yourself. And aside from that, what are the benefits to say somebody who's or to like incorporating chord melody practice into their practice routines to increase their overall guitar proficiency? What are some of the benefits you get out of them?
Right. This is actually, and now that I'm thinking about it, I wish I did it even more because there are so many benefits. I think first of all, your chord vocabulary is gonna increase tenfold.
Big time. Yeah.
Because by practicing the idea of harmonizing a note, every note with a voicing or the same kind of voicing, you develop a vocabulary where I can put, the root 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th on this chord, and even some other strange things eventually. Like, you develop a massive chord vocabulary just by nature of having to play everything at the same time.
Which is going to help your comping?
Yeah, your comping's going to excel because you're going to be able to hear melodies on top of your comping. It's going to help your, like you said, compositional practice, because by learning tunes, you learn the mechanics of tunes and how they work, so you'll be able to write better. There's also, and not a lot of people talk about this, there's an element of chops to playing chords in the way that you have to. The physicality of getting from voicing to voicing, I think, is not something we talk about when we talk about chops, because everybody thinks about like, oh, playing fast.
Right.
But there's a lot of skill required.
You certainly notice it as you're working on some of these things and putting them together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I vividly remember, going through chord melodies and just going back and forth at like 60 BPM trying to nail the voicings. Yep. And getting all the notes to ring cleanly, or even emphasize the ones you want to be emphasized. It's a great memorization tool, and I think that's the biggest thing for me in my practice. If you want to memorize a tune, there's no better way than to learn, if you think about it like a chorale, like the bass motion, or I should say the bass motion, the melody, and then the inner voices. There's no better way to remember all of those at the same time than to play them together.
Well, sure. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
It's huge as a memorization tool for me. And like I said, if you do enough of them, eventually you'll get to the point where, like you said, someone can put a chart in front of you, and it might not be Ted Green, but you can put chords under the melody and get through a tune by yourself, which is a really satisfying experience. Lastly, for benefits, I will say solo gigs are great because instead of paying 3 people, you can just pay yourself.
Always that one. There's always that one.
There's always that in the back of my mind. It's like, I could fire the bass player right now if I really wanted to.
Excellent. We should probably talk a little bit about, not to forget possibly one of the most important elements, and that's to actually listen to people who are great chord melody players, right? Don't forget to listen, just because that's how we learn so much of our soloing vocabulary, our comping vocabulary. Same goes with chord and melody. You have some thoughts on that? I'm guessing you probably do.
Yeah. So, I mean, like any part of the music, like be it comping or improvising single notes, I think it's super beneficial to check out what people have done and what people are doing, because it's such a diverse and open-ended idea of, the guitar being the whole orchestra.
So as you're talking about this, do certain names, like certain favorites come to mind for you?
To this day, Wes Montgomery is still my favorite in terms of chord melodies. Just the delivery is so perfect, and I love his arrangements and his choice of where to harmonize and how to harmonize. Specifically, I forget what record it's on. I can look. It's on So Much Guitar. There's this great chord melody on While We're Young. That's one of my favorites. I transcribed it when I was in high school, and it's to this day it's my favorite. Like I get visibly excited when I hear it.
Okay, so hear that,
so
everyone? Wes Montgomery.
Yeah. I mean, Wes in general, too. I mean, that's the thing about a lot of trio recordings, too, is even though it's not chord melody in the sense that you're the solo instrument, but there's only bass and drums behind you, so you have a lot of freedom. I'd say in general, any trio records you can find with guitarists on it, check those out, because they're basically doing the same thing. They still have to cover the harmony and the rhythmic content. And Peter Bernstein's another one of my favorites, is a more modern example, but still very in that school. He plays an intro on Who Can I Turn To? It's on, I believe, Earth Tones, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a beautiful arrangement. His tone, his delivery, the changes, like everything is so pretty. And it's really interesting too, because he plays it, again, like we had talked about earlier, he plays it in D major in the intro because he has that open string. And then he modulates to E flat when the band comes in. I believe I transcribed it a while back, but that's a really interesting one to check out, Peter Bernstein in general.
Excellent, fantastic. And so, of course, don't forget the listening part to putting these together. Well, Niko, it's been fantastic having you join us. Appreciate you joining us. We're hoping to get you back and to pick your brain on a whole variety of topics in the near future. Why don't you tell us where people can find you? Now, you're on Apple Music and Spotify, among others. So people just do a search, Niko Malinowski.
Yep, you can search my name and you'll find my fusion quintet wherever you get your music. If you want to stay up to date on what I'm up to, you can find me on Facebook at Niko Malinowski Music, or on Instagram. My handle is Niko.nmq. That's Niko.nmq. It's my band, NMQ, my quintet. So yeah, if you want to stay up to date on recordings and gigs and all that stuff, you can find me in those places.
Excellent. And I will, of course, put all these links in the description to the videos below for those of you watching it on YouTube. And for those of you on YouTube, please do consider giving this video a like if you found this one useful. And I can't imagine anybody listening would say that they didn't. And also maybe consider subscribing to the channel. We're going to be continuing to bring you such great insights from leading educators in the space today. And for those of you listening on podcast platforms like Apple Music, if you'd be so kind, hit that 5-star button. And that'll do it for us for today. We will see you on the next Fret Dojo podcast.
And for more jazz guitar lessons, tips, and free stuff, visit www.FretDojo.com.